Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome back to the Doctor's Lab with myself, Dr. Abdul 𝘏𝙗𝙚, and our beloved brother and Dr. Khalid Green. Assalamu alaikum, brother Khalid.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome back yourself, and I'm glad to be back.
Likewise, it's good to see you after so long, even though we've been in touch intermittently, alhamdulillah. I want to welcome back our audience and also thank our audience for the previous contribution and continued contribution that some had been having with myself, I dare say with you, brother Khalid. Some very interesting discussions, some very interesting engagement, I think, with those we agree with, those we don't agree with. But I think healthy discussion, looking at arriving at particular objectives and understandings about what we've been discussing and its context within the wider context of societies that we're living in across various parts of the world. So I'm appreciative of that. And as many know, with Stream Islam, as it's now called, we like to engage with our participants, mashallah, tabarakallah, and many are quite regular. So it will be interesting to see today those who have tuned in and participate on this occasion. And Khalid, I think that what we've agreed to discuss today, we are almost 20 years to the day of 9/11. And I think that what I want to do is come from a perspective and discuss with you, of course. We say the calm before the storm. And my focus, or what I was thinking of in this regard, and we've discussed this, was about Salafiyah as it progressed to the latter part of the 90s, right up to the eve and calamitous event, I think, for many, the Muslim world and the non-Muslim world alike, because of what subsequently occurred and continues to occur by and large, following 9/11. So I'm going to look from, I'm not going to get into aspects of personal accounts on this occasion, except to refer to particular discussions, debates, theological discourses that were taking place that shaped what occurred on 9/11. And I'll throw the curveball out there, if you like, and go right back to the 1990s, 1991, with the first Gulf War. And while others were looking at the biggest military air assault in the history of mankind, as it was known on that particular occasion, and I remember watching the skies over Iraq, Baghdad, lit up with missiles that January evening, because it started the year before 1990, the drum banging, the call for a war was building. We saw that momentum, and then I think it was January 1991 that we saw the launch. But while others were looking at that and the political elements of that, we Salafis, and I was only a year in 1991, I was a baby in Salafiyah. But as we were learning, that learning accelerated because of what started emerging with the Sahwa movement and what was being discussed theologically. Welcome, Brother Amir from Bangladesh.
Assalamu alaikum. Wa alaikum salam.
Gamo, it's good to see you here as well, mashallah, tabarakallah. So we were watching, wa alaikum salam, Octavia, welcome back. Shireen as well, mashallah, tabarakallah. The familiar names that are coming up, Malahat, alhamdulillah, they're all back. Welcome all of you. So saying this now, and Sister Kathamu, mashallah, I remember we were engaged in a very, very heated and prolonged discussion, theological discussion on Aqidah and Manhaj, methodology, and we saw the splits emerging, or not, I wouldn't say the splits emerging, I would say we started seeing the reality of the Takfiri dawah and the Takfiri ideology really raising its head, okay, alongside some of the statements from Osama bin Laden at the time in that instance. So for me, that was such a pivotal moment. And you could say, for want of a better phrase, not even 1 year in as a Muslim, Salafi Muslim as that, baptism of fire.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that was even prior to my embracing Islam. But by the time I became Muslim, a lot of those debates were already heated and positions were already pretty well cemented. And as you said, the baptism of fire. So you basically were, by the time I was introduced to the dawah, that, there was already almost principles established, in dealing with certain individuals and who to listen to, who not to listen to. And a position as far as what was transpiring in the world and the different parties aligning in the different ahzab, different groups. So so I can definitely relate to that, although I came much later into the argument or into the discussion and into the polemics, because that was prior to my becoming Muslim. And then when I became Muslim, and after becoming Muslim and after growing and basically sipping different manahij, different paths and different methodologies, when I came to the dawah and was introduced to the dawah, still a lot of the positions that were taken by most of us were basically kind of taqleed anyway. They were just blind following. Okay, if someone says this, they're this. If someone has this position, they're this. Stay away from these guys. It wasn't really necessarily knowledge based, unfortunately, for many of us, to take certain positions. We were just pulled into those into the ways of thinking, really.
See, that's fascinating. If you don't mind me asking, Khalid, when did you embrace Islam? When did you come to the deen?
So I became Muslim about 92, 93.
Okay, so not that long off, 3 years after me. Mashallah, at latest. So what was happening? We weren't in that polemic of who to avoid or anything like that. We were, as I've highlighted in the early parts of season 1 of my Chronicles of UK Salafism, we were into learning. We were into that, focusing upon Tawheed, focusing upon the seerah of the Prophet ﷺ, focusing on aspects of worship and the fiqh of particular aspects of worship. And I still got my notes. I've got my notes for a lot of that. And okay, we would learn as a side point about some of the deviant groups, but not as a over focus upon them in that, right, this is where they are, let's talk about them. There was just such a love for actual knowledge at this particular time. And what was important, as I said, when the Gulf War broke out, we only started learning particular aspects because this was prevalent in the Muslim community. And I want to add here, we had Abdul al-Faisal coming back and forth from Riyadh amongst the Muslim community, amongst the elders, before the Salafis took the helm, as it were elected into the community leadership. And whilst we were new, we were young bloods, as it were, and we were cautious because because we were told watch this and watch that, but coming into Islam and coming into guidance as opposed to the misguidance we were in beforehand, we were very cautious about anyone who was being touted or put forward with a perspective of knowledge. We wanted to know. By that time, we in the early days, we were learning about authentic hadith and ayahs of Quran and authentic tafsir, and which translation the Yusuf Ali translation, why that had some issues, even though the English was written very, very well and to a high standard. It was the footnotes that there were the esoteric explanations. So to move away from that, the Marmaduke Pictal, we were told to, while that was giving transliteration, we were told you'd become lazy learning the Arabic of the Quran, so to not go with the transliteration. All of these things we were learning, not from the point of deviation, but to know with certainty that what we were learning was authentic. So we had individual, when Faisal came amongst us, and the elders at the time, they were our elders, and they weren't on Salafiyah. And because he was black, and because of the premise of which Brixton had arisen was due to the wider racism from the other communities and everything, having a black graduate coming forward, he's going to be lauded. Like I had other individuals as well who come from Medina, Abdul Trinidadi, who had a particular ideological train of thought as well. So we had this hodgepodge coming in, but Abdul Faisal was purported as being the one who was closest to us and we could learn from him. So initially, there wasn't really any issue until they then sort of said, no, the Salafis are growing, and they had more of a Sufistic, Pan-African, as I said, a hodgepodge of ideologies there. So we were banned. So we started going to Surat Abdul Malik, rahimahullah, and Faisal started teaching there. But his teachings, we started hearing things that we had concerns about because of those foundational aspects that we'd learned the previous 2 years or so. 2, 3, 4 years by that time, and we stopped the study circle. So when this internecine dispute started, and the dividing line, the lines of demarcation became very, very clear, Faisal knew us and we knew him, and the lines of distinction between Tawheed and where they were starting to push a fourth category, Tawheed al-Hakimiyya, in order to legitimize revolting against the rulers, in order to legitimize making takfir upon the rulers, the hukam, became very, very evident. The line in the sand was emphatically drawn. So I'm bringing that again. Why? Because we had heated discussions on the phone when some of the Jordanian Mashaykh came. There was a back and forth with, we didn't have internet at that time, but there were writings and things being posted. We were sitting there translating what the Jordanian Mashaykh who were with us in our conferences were throwing backwards and forwards to Abu Hamza, and messengers coming from him to the mosque to pick up. All this was taking place subsequent to the Gulf War and the discussion of the changing sands of what had happened in the Gulf War at that particular instance. Now, some will say, well, what has that got to do with 9/11? And I would say, Khalid, it had everything to do with 9/11, because when we saw this that early on, from 1991, and we had to learn very, very quickly. And 3 years later, 1994, I was thrust into the position of chairman of Brixton Mosque, something that terrified me. I said, I don't want this, but I was told you need to take up this position. We had other events earlier on where we had Hizb ut-Tahrir, the Takfiris, even secret police, the undercover police were amongst us when we had these big community events to talk about electing a new leader and everything, because everyone was looking, including Abu Hamza, that Brixton Mosque as a convert mosque was the jewel in the crown for propagating whatever dawah would take root at that particular time. Abu Qatada even came to the mosque. He came straight from the airport when he landed. He came to the mosque. Dr. Abu Amina Bilal Phillips was with us. We were hosting him at that time. So a private meeting was had at that occasion. He wanted to come and speak to the leadership, and Dr. Bilal Phillips was there. Abu Muntazir from Jamas was there. Who else was there? There was one other who was there. I'm trying to remember because it was quite a significant meeting at that particular moment. As I said, Abu Muntazir and Dr. Amina Bilal Phillips. Abdullah al-Faisal came with accompanying Abu Qatada. And you could see that, and some Arab cohorts of Abu Qatada. Now, Dr. Abu Mina would not translate what was said after Abu Qatada left, but he looked. I've never seen him look so worried before. He sat really, really quietly. Abu Muntazir was very, very angry. This would have been 92, 93. So we were like, what was going on? Because we saw Abdullah Faisal and those who left with him haughty and proud of whatever had been said, because Abu Amina kept very quiet. We said, what do you say? And he said, I'm not going to translate. He said, but this man is very, very dangerous. Very, very dangerous. That's all he said concerning Abu Qatada. Then we saw the dawah of Abu Qatada, the fatwa he gave in Algeria, the bloodshed that came and emanated as a result of that. So all of this now for us, we were dealing, remember, the early 90s, Khalid.
Right, right.
So by that time, that baptism of fire meant we had to know our deen. We had to know the sunnah. We had to know tawheed. We had to know the raging debate that was transferring to the Muslim world concerning the fourth categorization, the politicization of tawheed and hakimiyya. Hakimiyya being a component of the first category, rububiyya, or the second category, asma wa sifat, in that particular an example. So that we were ready. So by the time 9/11 happened, the magnitude of that attack was shocking, but the seeds and the root of what caused or what emanated into that was not a surprise at all. We'd been fighting that since the early 90s, and then suddenly that's when everyone started looking at Salafis and what we stood for and what we were about, because Osama bin Laden was from Saudi. What did Saudi practice? It's called Wahhabism, or it's otherwise known as Salafiyya. And we saw that focus, that spotlight placed on Salafis like never before, and that conflation with extremism. So I'm going to stop there and let you come in at that particular point. But I wanted to talk about this calm before the storm, because in the 90s, Salafism was looked at widely by mainstream Muslims and others as non-threatening, as insular, socially conservative. But as you said in a previous podcast, the last podcast that we did, when we were talking about the impact or the contribution of Salafiyya, but Salafiyya shaped the way in which the wider Muslim populace in the West started referencing aspects of the deen, authenticating aspects of the deen, the books and the literature that came out. And I remember, because I was listening to the previous podcast, and that's what the impact and influence was, by and large, of Salafiyya. What was sad is that post 9/11, what we saw, and this is where we let ourselves down, and you and I have talked about it a lot, and this includes myself, I'd say. I don't know about yourself, but we had a haughtiness, an arrogance, a disdain, because we were so sure about what we were on, but we weren't learning things about usloob, manners, raqa'iq, softening of the heart, except with each other. And that's why when I realized with Jamas that it was actually a hizb in that instance. Wa alaikum salam, Jordan, and those of you who've just joined us, mashallah, tabarakallah. So I'm going to hand over to you at that point, because I've spoken for quite a while, but for me, I wanted to lay that platform, that ground, and give an insider perspective and a personal perspective of what was taking place in the 90s that led to where we found ourselves at 9/11. Again, I'll say for those who are joining us, we were not surprised, because what we had to face and what was emerging from 1991, not even a full year into me being a Muslim.
I think, context is everything, no doubt. And again, I didn't even come to the table until really 96, 97. And so a lot of those debates, a lot of what was going on, even anything about the dawah, I had no idea. Basically, because America is so big, there were communities that had been exposed to the dawah, that were on the dawah and what have you. But being where I'm from in Seattle, Washington, it was just a whole different reality of what we dealt with. And as Muslim minorities and as reverts, as a small revert community, because at that time we had a revert community. So the exposure to a lot of these concepts and the debate and everything, it just was non-existent. But later on, closer to 95 or something, we had some individuals who had been exposed to Faisal, his dawah, and were distributing his tapes, as well as Abu Hamza Misri and so forth. And so that dawah began to spread against the, really, aside from the Warth Deen community, we had a revert community. We had a sort of a nice dawah program, and we were doing, people were becoming Muslim. But we had no knowledge. And so the brothers, especially a lot of brothers coming from a street background, they took to that dawah. So this is all to say that, you know, those seeds began to spread and to be sown, and the seeds, I would say, of takfir and that extremism. You know, there began to be an imprint. The first book that we received, two books that I can remember that were sort of our core study books, because we weren't really learning much about anything of our deen, you know, as far as studying, as far as fiqh, as far as anything. You know, we would just read. There was really no classes going on. So some of the first two books I can remember, because the group, the masjid I functioned with, they had the bay'ah to Jamil Alameen. And, you know, so for those who don't know, that's like a secret pledge of allegiance to his group, to his jama'ah. And, you know, we could talk extensively about all those things, but anyhow, so we studied his book, Revolution by the Book. He had a famous treatise that he wrote, as well as Sayyid Qutb's Milestones. So those were books that we all purchased. We actually would, you know, read a little bit, but we still had no concern for real study, nor did we have anyone to teach us. I went to the East Coast, 96, and that's when I was exposed to the dawah, going to Abu Muslima's community. And so that was my beginning, my introduction to the dawah, but also some of these debates, because the Faisal dawah never held with me, because it was just amazing how easy he would make takfir. Like, I'm drinking this coffee, he would make takfir in the same way. You know, it's just like, you know, it was amazing. It's like a comedy, and some question his mental status because of the way he made takfir. It was just unbelievable. And so, you know, I can remember traveling with my companions, and we'd listen to Faisal tapes, and we just hear all of this, you know, constant, well, you know, his extremist views. You began to wonder, did I embrace the right religion? Am I really a Muslim? Because he just said this, he just said this, he just made takfir of half the world or most of the world. You know, it was just really, but it had an appeal for some of the brothers who came from the street, because they needed a black and white narrative, and they needed something where they could draw their swords. And literally, some brothers used to walk around with their swords. And so that was kind of my introduction to that. What I would say, as you said, the baptism by fire. So after being exposed to the dawah and some of the positions, because it still wasn't based on knowledge. And my argument is, or my view is that still, even a lot of people who were exposed to the dawah, and I'm talking about some of the people who became leaders in, you know, because we began to look to the UK as the hub of the dawah as far as the West, you know, and no doubt, if we're honest, they were producing Maktaba Salafiyya and what was coming in Brixton. You know, those were the things that we were being exposed to as far as how we should understand our Islam. So we weren't learning tahara and how to properly pray, but rather we were jumping right into major issues of takfir and, you know, what's your position on Ali Tamimi, and, you know, all of these things, you know, and a lot of it, when you look back, you can see how little knowledge there was. And in fact, I would argue, even with some of the people that are students of knowledge and so forth, there's still quite a nuqs. There's still great shortcomings with some of them that are, you know, with regards to their knowledge, and no doubt as far as their wisdom and as far as their implementation of what they've learned. So, you know, I came to the, you know, was exposed to these issues much later. You know, 97, I went to Yemen, went to Damaj, Sheikh Muqbil, but still, because we didn't have, a lot of us, we were just learning our Arabic and stuff like this. We still, you know, the Maktaba Salafiyya, as it was still, you know, we had the translated things. Brothers were debating and arguing in Damaj, I can remember, and we had the scholars right there. And I can remember some of those extremist views came out, and I was like, no, that's wrong. And I remember, and then finally they took it to Sheikh Yahya al-Hajuri, because the man was right there. He's at the table. Just go over there. but yet we're so entangled in debating. And I met a lot of brothers from Brixton, a lot of brothers from, especially there was a lot from Brixton and different places. So that's how we began to be exposed to a lot of the discussions and what's the position to take. But still, I would argue, even those people who were giving us those positions, it wasn't really knowledge-based. A lot of it was not knowledge-based, because we can still, here we are 20 whatever years later, and still what we see being produced with many of the brothers is still some strange outlook on the world and a lack of knowledge. Come on, you sat with major scholars, or you were in the company of various scholars, but still you haven't really been blessed, I guess, with fiqh fi din. Some understanding.
Absolutely. I think, mashallah.
And last point I just want to mention really quickly is, so that way I blend into where you left off, is that no doubt, as you said, all of those things, they led to, we're a part of that what conflation, or I'm not sure what the word is, to leading up to 9/11, no doubt. But as I said, I came much later to the table, and as far as being introduced to that. So I was coming into the debate at that time, 97 and so forth, but I could only read and hear about from a historical context of what was going on in the UK, because again, that was the hub. We didn't have, I'd never met any real scholars or heard until Sheikh Muqbil.
And this is quite interesting. First, I want to say wa alaikum salam to our brothers and sisters who just come on, Truth Seeker, Malahat, Sister Amal, mashallah, welcome to all of you. What I want to go back onto with what you said there, and again, for those who are participating in this, the calm before the storm, many don't know this context which we're speaking about, and it was very foundational, and I think it was very influential to how the dawah in the West spread, even those who were not upon the Salafi dawah, because they were impacted by what we were doing. So you've mentioned Abdul Faisal. We were at that time, Faisal, when we had expelled him from the mosque, and then when I became elected, I still got the book that he bought, and he came to my home because he knew me. We used to work together in Yusuf Islam's Islamic school. And so some of his teachings and his preaching started going off in a particular direction. And when we were closer to Faisal, and I'll share this, and I don't mind sharing this, he used to tell others, Abdul Haqq is my #1 student. Okay, this is before he went off in this deviation.
Yeah.
So it's not a wonder for those who have had the opportunity to listen to Faisal in nearly every one of his diatribes, as I call them. You'll see somewhere in there he spends a time on me, and he really gets vociferous. He says the most heinous things concerning me. Wow. And I know him well. He's a case study in my PhD studies. He knows that I know him well. He knows things that I know that others don't know, in that sense that about him, ideology, when the change took place, everything like that. But the point was, he put out a cassette, as it was in those days in the 90s. And in that cassette, it was the deception of the Saudi Salafis. So that was a disparaging...
Part 1 and 2. Part 1 and 2, yeah.
Right. A disparaging attack, this description of us. And without going into that in too much detail, our backgrounds, our backgrounds. You've referred to some of the individuals who came to Deen who were carrying their swords and samurais, and we carried other things at that time as well, before we became Muslims and even embracing Islam. So when he said our wives should divorce us or separate, and that they are halal for those who are with him and subscribe to his view. Now we move things on a level where violence and the threat of violence from either side, because we weren't going to sit back and accept something like that if they were to be the antagonists, the protagonists, sorry. It changed the whole climate now. It changed the whole climate. And this was all on a micro level. For us, it was macro, because it was all across the country, especially fighting the takfiris metaphorically, ideologically, and sometimes physically. That likewise, some of them who left them came under the umbrella of Salafia, spoke to me. I became very close with some of them. Said, look, we used to be told by Abdul 𝘭𝙧𝙾𝙡 when we were coming, he was holding circles here in the town hall in this place across London, and he would say, watch out for the Salafis from Brixton and come armed. And they would. He told us this. They would look out. We never went to shut them down or anything like that. Even though we're perfectly capable of doing that, we were interested in the learning and basically the dawah to our community and the wider non-Muslim community with the lectures we're doing across the country. So it's very important that this is discussed at this point now, because many see 9/11, and I'm going to say even some Muslims, Khalid, 9/11 happened and they took up the whole narrative when the focus was thrust upon Salafis. They took up that whole, for them, it was like a puzzle that had come together. But instead of 2 + 2 equaling 4, it was 2 and 2 is 22. And we had Muslims falling over themselves from a liberal perspective, which we may call progressive today, also pointing the finger and standing with non-Muslim detractors saying the cause of this is this movement. The cause of this are these women who dress in black, wear niqab, and are insular or isolationist or socially conservative in that particular instance. That caused us a lot of difficulty because we were fighting from within our community, trying to propagate a narrative that had been widely accepted prior to 9/11. The amount of individuals embracing Salafia from the 2nd, 3rd generation, those who were converting, coming to Salafia. When I became a Muslim, we weren't told it was Salafia we were embracing. It wasn't mentioned at all. Surah Abdul Malik, rahimahullah, didn't feel there was a necessity to put a label on it at that particular time until we saw things mushrooming to such an extent that some became uncertain of what was being discussed by Hizb ut-Tahrir from a politicized perspective, them coming from a politicized perspective and a radical perspective themselves, black radicalism before we embraced Islam and everything like that. So this discussion here, I don't think that the viewers are going to be hearing anything remotely like this, except here, Stream Islam, at this time, at this point in time, because we're not talking 20 years ago, we're talking about 30 years leading up to that trajectory, that pathway up to that. And before we go conclude later on, I want to refer to some non-Muslim academics who post 9/11 started writing and what they were saying, and we'll touch upon that shortly. But I want to stick with the fact that these individuals were initially amongst us. Those who've seen my book, the title from my PhD, entitled Extremists in Our Midst, Confronting Terror. Because they were among us. They were amongst, in our midst. Abu Hamza had a Jamaat that he was moving around, not Finsbury Park, before that. Abu Qatada was moving around delivering lectures, and you'd had people from different persuasions go into those particular lectures. There was a vying for a congregation, a very thirsty, hungry congregation that was seeking knowledge, but seeking knowledge to place a context on what we were witnessing around the world at that particular time. And Islam was and continues to be a driving force. The number of conversions that took place in the 90s and that continue to take place up until today amongst urban communities, white and black, non-Muslim Asians, South Asians as well, in America, Puerto Ricans and others. It was so potent, and that was one of the reasons why other persuasions, other denominations of the Muslims needed to look at what was happening, because they saw this catchment that was coming from the converts, from the reverts, the energy that was coming from this particular segment of wider society, and the fervency with the practice and the visibility of us not being ashamed of hiding identity. And as I've said, and I've been self-critical, we became Arabized to some extent for too long, thinking that that was how we had to be. And in doing so, we did push them away from us, from our own communities. But alhamdulillah, I believe that there's been a redress of that imbalance, and it's continuing to take place to a larger, a lesser or larger extent, depending from which standpoint you're viewing it. But I remember this calm. I remember this lucidity with which we would move around the UK and engage with non-Muslims. I remember, as I was speaking in yesterday's show to Abdul Green in the Piece of Cake, we had non-Muslims come in. I've still got letters in my archives from Christians and non-Muslims, 1, 2, 3-page handwritten letters. They'd attended the lectures and said, we'd enjoyed what you were speaking about and this concept of monotheism and all sorts of things. But what do you say about this regarding Jesus? And can we meet and can we discuss? After 9/11, and especially when Brixton was thrust into the spotlight after December, the shoe bomber affair, which I think we'll talk about in 2 weeks' time from now, because there's a lot to talk about which the audience may not have heard or experienced before. And we are speaking with, and I'm speaking from the perspective of being in the eye of the storm when these things blew out. Our community was in the eye of the storm. The world media converged on us because of 2 former attendees of our mosque on that occasion, in that example that I'm citing there. So we moved around freely, giving dawah, not cautious of being castigated and labeled. We even had the Balkans conflict, the Bosnian war and what took place there. And some of us went over, some went to fight, not hiding identities. Some of us went over to give charitable aid and assist those who were being butchered and everything over there. And we went over without hiding our identities from the British border security, and you had non-Muslim ex-military going over there and lending their hands to Bosnians, to Croatians, the Croats, whoever was fighting, and paid the highest price. This was all taking place in the 90s. It's unfathomable, it's unthinkable that context, that environment could ever occur again, could reoccur again.
Yes, right.
This is why I say the calm before the storm. Because when we look at what happened from 9/11, we saw a closing down of society. We saw a targeting of Muslims. We saw Islamophobia become more of a thing than it ever become before.
Yes, absolutely. Highlighting that calm before the storm and some issues, as you said, the freedom of movement. You know, we used to go, and this is actually prior to my embracing the Dawah as well, but up on all that time, you know, there was just such a greater impact that Muslims had on other communities and in giving Dawah. You know, you could move, you know, my normal dress back then was an izar, which now I might wear before going to sleep, and imam, or kind of the Yemeni style. Well, not a igal, but kind of an imama, that the Yemeni style. That's how I used to always, you know. So I'd wear that and a shalwar kameez on top. You know, that was my regular dress. You know, we go to the airport, we go wherever we travel. You know, I can remember walking in some of the roughest neighborhoods, especially on the West Coast, you know, in LA and going to Compton and places like this. And the non-Muslims, even the gangbangers, they respected Muslims back then. You know, it was a very different time. As you said, it will not return, I don't believe, ever. But it was a very different time. I can remember how many people were walking at night in the streets of Oakland, California, you know, and you got people laying on the street, drunk, getting up, salam alaikum, you know, people just respected Muslims. How many, the Dawah, the opportunity for Dawah was there, you know, and I'm sure others can speak on that in other parts of the country and around the world in the West, as you mentioned in the UK. So yeah, that was the calm before the storm. After 9/11, the pressure that was put on Muslim countries and the narrative change, and as you said, the Dawah took a hit, but Muslims in general were under the microscope. and things changed radically. And I would also say, even it was a growing trend of change, meaning it would, because all it took is other events, and then things would kick off and get worse again, and Muslims would be under the microscope or the magnifying glass even more so. So, for example, there was still some positive movement, there was still some dawah, there were still some things going on. And as far as the movement, and as far as one thing I want to mention, when I first came to Saudi Arabia, you used to be able to go to the grocery store. And this is where I bought a lot of my videos. And you could buy the series of what was called 𝘾𝙖𝙡𝙢, the Russian hell, meaning the conflict in Chechnya. And you could buy that in the grocery store. That was like regular. It was so, it wasn't a big deal to speak about jihad and those kind of things and what was going on. Excuse me. And that was the reality. But then when the pressure, things changed, institutions, the pressure on Muslim governments, especially Saudi Arabia, to restrict their funding, then a lot of Islamic causes and universities around the world lost funding because everything was under scrutiny. That maybe you're funding extremism. No, we're going to turn inward. And that only began to progress, become worse and worse and worse over the years. But yeah, I recall when I first went to Saudi, you could go to the grocery store. It's like going to Safeway in America or Kruger's, or I don't know what it is in the UK. But you go to Walmart and you get your videos of Russian soldiers being killed by mujahideen in Chechnya. And the famous mujahideen, Abu Khattab and others, so this stuff used to really hype up a lot of the youth, especially there in Saudi Arabia. And a lot of them actually would go, especially when Iraq jumped off and stuff like this. But so they obviously reined all that in and it changed. But yeah, that was a part of that last part of the calm of the storm. It just progressively got worse, especially 9/11, after 9/11, or actually, I guess that was right about that time. So that was a little bit prior. So that was still part of the calm, I guess.
No, Jazakallah khair, Khalid.
Yeah.
Those memories, I think this is really important that we impart what we're doing. And just got thinking back on, again, 1994, I traveled out for a conference on behalf of Jamaat. Abu Musa asked me to go out. There's a conference in a place called Buckystown or Buckysville. You had to go to Washington, D.C. and travel out from there. And so I went, and what I was told I'd be met by Sarat Abdul Malik told me that a friend, Abdul brother, Sheikh Abdul's brother, was there. He would meet me at the airport. I arrived at the airport, JFK, in New York first before going on to Washington the next day or two, and I was going to spend Jummah and the Saturday there in Brooklyn. So I arrived in the airport, and it's very interesting. When I got there, and I went as you, wearing my thobe, visibly Muslim and everything, and I had a very interesting encounter because a Jewish young man around the same age as me, we're waiting at the to get our luggage, and he was waiting next to me. He actually came over to me, spoke to me, and I was suspicious. I think, okay, why is this Jewish individual coming to speak to me? And he was like, what's your name? And I said, why? And he said, my name's Solomon. You would say Suleiman in Arabic. And he was being friendly. And I saw there was some elders in the distance, maybe his uncle or his father or whatever. And they were sort of keeping a sort of eye because, like, okay, he's talking to a Muslim and everything like that. And I didn't really say much because I thought, okay, I'm not going to say anything, incriminate myself, and then something jumps off. I don't know who this individual is. And he's a visible Jew, as I'm a visible Muslim. And we know the antipathy that was there from, let's say it was there from a contemporary context, because when we go back in centuries, and we will talk about that one in another time, when the Jewish communities and the Christian communities lived under the Islamic State and there wasn't that antagonism and everything, but that's altogether another subject. I won't go off tangentially in that instance. But when we departed, when I got my luggage and I thought, I'm going now, a policeman came, security came to me and stopped me. So I thought, here we go. And they just asked me some simple questions, what I was doing, where I was going and everything like that. And I answered. Then they let me go. And I felt a bit nervous and I felt a bit aggrieved that, well, you didn't stop the Jewish individuals. They just all went through and you've just stopped me, the only visible Muslim with an English accent, not obviously, clearly not American. Anyway, I then met Abdul's brother, mashallah, tabarakallah, who was going to host me. And we went and before that, I got a taxi to a spot. And this was all for me very, like, I'm not in London. This is all I've heard of New York. And so I got a taxi to this spot. And then this huge figure came, knocked on the taxi door, leaned over, spoke very aggressively to the taxi driver. And he said, basically asking him, how much did you charge? And the guy was shaken. He said, I charged this amount. And he goes, Assalamu alaikum, 𝘭𝚗, it's me. And I can't remember the brother's name. And I got out. And before we jumped into his car, he said to me, have you seen the Twin Towers? He said, that's them up there.
Subhanallah.
This is the first time I've narrated that.
Wow.
I remember him, and it only came back to me after 9/11. I was thinking, I didn't pay it any mind. He goes, you know the Twin Towers? I was like, yeah, I've heard the Twin Towers. He goes, that's them right there. And I just looked up. It was the evening, and I saw the Twin Towers. And that was it. Didn't give it any more of a thought. Went with him. The next day, Jummah now. And audience, bear with me. Let me indulge for the moment, just to show you what the atmosphere was like. A Brit, Salafi, in America, New York, meeting people that I didn't know but had trust for because of the connections, the networking. We went to Jummah. It was at Siraj Wahar's mosque. He wasn't there at the time. The community was thriving, was vibrant, absolutely amazing. Someone was there for Jummah, and they did afterwards, non-Muslim, and they said he wants to become Muslim. They did that big, I found it cringeworthy, shahada in front of the whole Jamaat. But then later on that evening, because of how respected the Muslims were in Brooklyn, okay, they had security detail for a huge event, where so many one or two schools it was held in. The Muslim security, they were very impressive. There was a brother who I knew who used to come to Brixton, and he was there and said, look, Abdul, stick with me, I'm doing security. But there was no threat of violence or whatever. BT Express were on the stage, if anyone knows the 70s band BT Express. And I was amazed at the respect and the presence of the Muslims amongst the wider non-Muslim community. So much so, Khalid, I'll share this with you, and I find it hilarious, as does everyone else. When I went out for Jummah that day, my host said to me, we had breakfast, and he said to me, right, you can't wear these trainers. I had some Nike or Adidas, I can't remember what they were. And he said, you can't, as you know, you call them sneakers. He said, you can't wear these the whole time we're out. And I said, why not? I've got these, and I can't remember what I had else, but it wasn't suitable. And he said, no, you'd be, it's going to cause a problem. I'll give you something to wear. And he went into his wardrobe, his closet, as you call it, and he pulled out these bedroom slippers, these fluffy bedroom slippers. I thought, wallahi, I thought he was joking. And he said to me, he said, wear these. And I stopped and looked at him, and I said, are you kidding me? And he was serious. He goes, you're going to wear these all day, you'll be safe, and no harm will come to you. I said, I'm going to be looked at. He goes, no one will give you a second look. You're with me. He was insistent. So I put the slippers on, fluffy bedroom slippers, okay? They fit me, brand new. He hadn't used them. Put those on, left my trainers indoors, and then he reached for his gun and he put it into the small of his back. That was part of his attire. And then we went out. People were playing, what do you call it, crap on the side. He said, don't walk through, walk round. Was in Brooklyn. Cars were stopping. Even Dwight York, Imam Isa's followers stopped, salamed him. I was like, we said, this is Ansar Allah, this is such and such, there's nation. We moved through Brooklyn with me wearing bedroom slippers and no one batted an eyelid. And I was like that the entire day.
SubhanAllah.
But there was tranquility, there was security, and there was interaction between the Muslims and the wider Muslim populace.
And
this
even
was
non-Muslims.
put to the test. Yeah, and non-Muslim, wider populace, non-Muslim, sorry. And that was put to the test post 9/11. Not only in the American communities, Brixton communities, and everywhere else.
Absolutely. Yeah, it was a different time. So I think you've laid that foundation, you know, of the possibilities or anyway, what that's historical, because again, the way that things, the dawah progressed in the 90s is very difficult to replicate. You know, it was a different time period. And as you said, you know, we have countless stories like that. After 9/11, I can remember in those same areas and same neighborhoods in which we used to give dawah, you'd hear people, especially in the African-American community, you might say, yeah, you need to learn about Islam, da, da, da. You're not going to blow me up, are you? You know, you hear this kind of stuff like that. Y'all ain't thinking about blowing up something, are you? and, you know, they would joke, but
right.
the climate changed, you know, and it became, and I know some brothers, a brother who I met in Saudi Arabia, and he was telling me about going back. He's from LA. And he said, you know, illustrating that change, he said, you know, and especially the parts of LA he was from, you know, are rough areas. And this is a white brother. He was mentioning this. So he said that he was sitting on the corner, and he said some Mexicans came up in a car, and they literally said, we're like, you know, so pro-American, and they just spit in his face. And he said, I just wiped it off, because he said there was nothing, you know, these guys would have, you know, it was a done deal. And so this shows you how things changed radically around in the West, but in the world, you know, after that. So I think the point of why he couldn't wear sneakers in Brooklyn, because he might get robbed, you know, for those nice sneakers. Okay. and yeah.
Also, even though I was with someone who was more than capable, he would have had to draw his weapon, and there could have been some fatalities there. And I would have been the contributory factor to that, and would have stood out like a sore thumb in that on that particular occasion. Now, okay, I'm glad you got it, Paivan. Thank you. But what I want to highlight at this point now, Khalid, we dropped the ball as Salafis. Okay. Why do I say that? Because when we started seeing the narrative shift against Salafism, the Salafis, I remember reaching out to students of knowledge. By this time, I was in Saudi Arabia, and I'm going to go forward post 9/11 to 2002, and then I'll jump back again. And I saw work coming out that was of a concern to me, where Salafia was being mentioned. And others were seeing that as, look, we're being recognized. Salafis have been spoken about. And there was an excitement about that, because pre 9/11, we were never a thing mentioned with any great focus at all, which is a surprise in some instances when you look at what happened post 𝘾𝙖𝙡𝙢 𝘾𝙖𝙡𝙬. But that was the case. But they didn't see that the sea change, the tide was changing about the perceptions of Salafis, and what happened amongst us as Salafis, which has continued up until today. And I won't go off on too wide a tangent, but you know where I go with this, that some stuck us in a context where it was all internecine in that way.
Right.
What'd you say?
Yeah, I absolutely. And I would say for there was a couple of things going on there. I think for one, I think a lot of us and that's even for those who were students of knowledge at that time and who were really, you know, either graduating or what have you. There was just, you know, a lot of misconceptions really about the dawah, plain and simple, and from those within, and a lack of knowledge. I really actually attribute it, because it isn't just you go through some books, but, you know, there was really a lack of understanding, because, you know, there were certain issues we were very busy with, and we were giving dawah to, you know, you're a new Muslim. Okay, here's your toolkit.
That's right.
We're going to teach you a little bit we're going to teach you some tawheed, but not probably that extensively. And we're going to teach you some positions on issues. Okay, the takfiris are this.
Right.
If you hear someone mention Sayyid Qutb, make tabdi of him quickly. Do this. You know, there wasn't knowledge. There really wasn't a lot of knowledge, I would say. And a lot of the du'at came back, from what I can see, you know, a lot of those guys we looked up who are considered the elders now, and this and that and the other, you know, a lot of them were not all steeped like tea as far as their level of knowledge.
Right.
And so they came back pushing certain aspects of the dawah, leaving off huge aspects of the dawah, because we know that manners, Islamic manners, is so intrinsic to the deen.
Yes.
The Prophet ﷺ said, "Ma min shay'in athqulu fi mizan mu'min yawm al-qiyamah min husn khulq wa inna Allah yubghidu al-fahish al-bari." He said, there isn't a thing that weighs heavier on the scale of a believer yawm al-qiyamah than good manners. And verily Allah hates wicked and sinful speech. If we just practice that hadith alone from our Prophet ﷺ, and you claim to be from Ahl Sunnati wal Jama'ah, and you claim to follow the Salaf as-Salih, and all the books of the Salaf written about manners and being quiet and speaking only if there's maslahah, there's benefit, weighing the harms and the benefits of your speech, how you interact with people, all of these things, there was so much that was left out. Instead, there was just a narrative. It was just about rad and, you know, about rejection and refutations. And you began to see, even in an early stage, a lot of the brothers began to eat one another. You know,
and
just
exactly.
quickly.
I'm glad you said that, because I've made that reference before to a cannibalism that took place amongst the Salafis, and that became the main trend. It's as though there became a boredom with refuting when required those that needed to be refuted. When Hizb ut-Tahrir were prominent, we didn't go after them for the sake of going after them, but those who were getting confused by their ideology, we refuted. The Takfiris were refuted, but we saw an inward focus that became predominant over all else, and that's what's defined particular elements, like the cult, the Abu Khadijite cult that you hear me refer to, and you know I refer to them in that way. But 9/11 was a prime opportunity to show, from a Western perspective, the unity and the efficacy of Salafiyah. And some of us, many, did come out and make statements and put booklets and refer to the scholars and everything. But lo and behold, after a short period of time, it returned to that cannibalistic tendency of who was not the right Salafi, who was incorrect as a Salafi, and then we saw the fracturing of Salafis even more. So much so, Khalid, in Hyde Park Corner, Speaker's Corner, which is world renowned, as you know, a Takfiri proponent came forward, and it was recorded, and he shouted at the Salafis, and he said, "What's wrong with you lot? Stop fighting each other. I used to enjoy our fights. Let's get back into our fights. Why are you fighting against each other? You stopped attacking me. I want you to." This was recorded. And that's how embarrassing the whole scenario became. So as we're drawing to a conclusion, that inward cannibalism that was taking place up to 9/11, and it continued post 9/11, I think has been one of the factors that has damaged the image and the impression upon Salafis. But in doing so, it's damaged it upon Salafiyah. So when we're trying to speak about Salafiyah, which is Islam, when you look, every Muslim, as I've mentioned before, will agree with Salafi. If I said it's the understanding of the companions of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ as practiced, the succeeding generation being the Tabi'een, and the succeeding generation after them, the Atba Tabi'een, all Muslims will say, yes, these are the pristine, authentic generations to follow. And that's what Salafiyah is. But that became obscured by the ill behavior of ourselves as Salafis, the internecine disputes, the cannibalistic tendencies, and the disdain that was held for all Muslims. And we know that a majority of Muslims, we know Ibn Taymiyyah said that Ahl Sunnah are those who have mercy for mankind and the people of Ahl Sunnah. And so, Khalid, this is a report. I'm going to go to a non-Muslim report, one of the first that I saw just as I was embarking on my PhD studies, in which it's from the, you've seen me refer to it, and I've used one of their frameworks, the Militant Ideology Atlas by William McCants and Jarrett Brackman. And I want to just go to some of what they were saying very briefly regarding Salafis. And it said that basically, one of the conclusions, I'll just go to the conclusion here. The West, especially the United States, should be modest about its ability to intellectually challenge Salafism. The movement gained mass popularity during the last century, and Salafis now constitute a majority or significant portion of the Muslim population in the Middle East and North Africa. This is despite the fact that it was often strongly opposed by secular nationalist regimes and non-Salafi clerics. Western governments have neither the local credibility nor the cultural expertise necessary to diminish the popularity of Salafism. This is what they wrote in 2004 concerning Salafiyah. The West does not have the intellectual capacity. This is very key. So what did they choose to do instead? Conflate Salafiyah with extremist ideology, and at least, at the very minimum, say that Salafis are non-violent extremists. And so then you had those Muslim communities and those Muslim entities that were on the back foot for most of the 90s coming forward and saying, yes, we are from within the Muslim community. They are either non-violent extremists or they are extremists. Nevertheless, they are precursors. Their ideology and their practice are precursors towards violent extremism. And we Salafis were asleep, except for when it was fighting each other. And the storm continues to rage against this orthodox understanding of Islam. And let's say that the West has succeeded in part for argument's sake. Now look at where it's all gone to. Anything of orthodoxy in Islam from a Western perspective has now been targeted and challenged. The niqab in France, the hijab now, our children even speaking concerning Islam and orthodoxy and sunnah. People being prevented from entering premises in the UK for wearing t-shirts saying Free Palestine, for example. So much has been curtailed, and the once powerful Salafi narrative, again, remember here, the West lacks the ability to intellectually challenge Salafism. But we've done it to ourselves, Khalid. Yeah. We've done it to ourselves. And I think that if we accept and understand this and acknowledge this and have some humility in this, not you and I, but Salafis on the whole, our brothers and sisters who are still involved in this inward navel gazing, and if not that, internecine fighting, if they were to sit and review the last 20 years and pre-9/11 and the effectiveness of the dawah leading up to it, we had our mistakes in our behavior, bad manners and things like this, but many of us have learned from that, and we've progressed along my cognitive development framework, as you know. So if we were to review this and really press the reset button, but with the maturity that many of us have now, I believe the potency of this call, which is a beautiful call, self-reform before societal reform, would become even more effective than it was in the 90s. No. And Allah knows best, inshallah.
So I just want to, just for the sake of clarification, because perhaps there's confusion for some of the people, and I'm going to tie this in as quick and briefly as possible. What is Salafiyah? What are we talking about? So as Dr. Abdul Haq mentioned, basically it is a call, as our Sheikh Imam Muqbil said. This is, I just thought, this is so relevant, his statement. he said, Dawah to Ahl Sunnah, the call of Ahl Sunnati wal Jama'ah. Okay. هذا دعوة من كتاب الله إلى كتاب الله ومن سنة رسول الله صلى الله عليه وعلى آله وسلم إلى سنة رسول الله صلى الله عليه وعلى آله وسلم. So he said the da'wah of Ahl Sunnah. So this is what Salafi is. It is the da'wah from the book of Allah to the book of Allah, and from the sunnah of the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wa alihi wasallam to the sunnah of the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wa alihi wasallam. There's Salafi right there. So that means that you are trying your best to understand and adhere to the Quran and the Sunnah with the understanding of the Sahaba radiyallahu ta'ala anhum ajma'in in those first three generations, as Dr. Abdul Haqq mentioned. That in essence, what has happened, what has been the problem? One of the problems, and this also kind of addresses the person who said, what's the difference between Madkhali and Salafi or something like this? One of the issues, and in the greater scheme of what we've been talking about, that has happened is there has been, due to probably a lack of knowledge, a lack of adherence to the principles that were being espoused of the Dawah to Salafiyya, and a lack of going back to those books and really adhering to all of the principles, not just what suits our fancy. So with that, there has been a alignment to individuals instead of going to those principles that even some of those very individuals taught us. And as the questioner mentioned, they're referring to Sheikh Rabi Madkhali, okay, one of our mashayikh. Now, if we practice what I just said, that means we weigh what the sheikh says, and when the sheikh refutes someone and the principles that the sheikh espouses, we weigh that on the scale of the Quran and the Sunnah and the understanding of the Salaf. That which the sheikh says, or a ruling that he may issue that contravenes the Quran or the Sunnah or the madhab of the Salaf, then we discard that. We don't accept that. And that doesn't, and I'm just using the sheikh because his name is being slandered and brought forth. So that has been a major problem that people do not seem to digest, even, and that means we've given the narrative to individuals, meaning, for example, as Dr. Abdul Haqq mentioned about the S-Pubs or Salafi publications and Maktab Salafi and whatever their names are, they were the narrative for very long in the West. They controlled the narrative. And still, right to the minute that we're speaking at 12:11 my time, people still give them the narrative. They say, so-and-so said this, you Salafi say this and this and this. No, they said that. That's not the dawah necessarily. We weigh what they do on that same scale. And that's what the Salaf said. There's a great statement by Imam Malik, rahmatullahi alayhi, rahmatan wasi'ah, in which he said, we know the truth, or we know men by the truth. We don't know the truth by men. So you can't say Khalid Green said and say that's the haqq. La, you look to what Khalid Green said and you put that on the scale of the book and the Sunnah. You can't say Dr. Abdul Haqq said, Sheikh Rabi said, Sheikh Abdul Malik Ramadani said, Sheikh Ali Hassan said, Sheikh Abdul Muhsin al-Abad said, Imam Malik said, without weighing what they say on the scale. So what has happened within the Salafi community is there has been what a lot of the extreme Sufis do, is that Hizbiyah. They said, if you don't accept from Sheikh Ubaid, Sheikh Rabi', Sheikh so-and-so, you are not Salafi or you've went against it. Some others say, if you don't accept from Sheikh Yahya al-Hujuri, if you don't accept from this one, you are not really Salafi and you're Mubtadi'ah. And another group said, if you don't accept this. So what has happened is Hizbiyah has entered our ranks. And rather, it's been there for a long time. Okay. And we have to be vigilant in fighting the Hizbiyah. That's why we strive our best to continue to adhere. Whenever I'm looking at something and looking at myself and people criticize, I try to go back to these books to see what am I saying? Is it in line with that? And am I taking at least a legitimate view that is supported by the book and the sunnah, or is it my desires? And what has happened is there are people who control the narrative, and I still get those kind of questions all the time. Someone sent me a question yesterday: is Hajuri okay? And the other ones say Sheikh Rabi this, and these ones say Muhammad bin Hadi said this. You know, which one? No, it's not about which one. It's about the truth. Your job is to adhere to the truth. It's not to adhere to what I say, what the Sheikh says, what this Sheikh says. That's not your job. That's not what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala commanded you to do. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, obey Allah and obey his messenger. That's what your job is. Your job is that. And you look, and we love the scholars for their adherence and their exhortation to that. They exhort us to follow the book and the sunnah. If they fall short in an area or make a mistake in an area, it is impermissible for us to follow that in a mistake. And that's why we're not blind sheep. We don't just say, well, our Sheikh said, just like the extreme Sufis and the people who worship graves and the people who say it's okay to supplicate to other than Allah, it's not shirk, and others say it's okay to rebel against the rulers. We don't follow that nonsense and that garbage, because that garbage and that nonsense and that stuff that comes out from a wound, that stuff is not supported by the book and the sunnah and the madhab of the salaf. So we don't accept it. We don't accept that, because a lot of times it's either from the juhal, the ignorance who cut and paste, or it's from people who are learned who don't even know what they've learned. You know, I don't care if they studied with 4,000 ulama and they graduated from the prestige, they graduated from Yale, and they graduated from Jamiat Islamiyah, and they got a doctorate here and they got a master's here. Al-ibra bi haqaiq, the reality is of what the person is practicing and preaching. Laysa bi musamiyat, and not what musamiyat. I don't know. So I see that is a problem. I see Strictly YouTube said, I used to be a flaming medkhali. That was your problem. Even Sheikh Rabi himself didn't tell you to be a medkhali. You took that and you took the narrative of those people. And to Sheikh, what I've heard the Sheikh say, and I see it in his books, doesn't mean he's free from mistakes, and anyone is not free from mistakes, but I never heard him exhorting you need to follow me and stuff. And if he did, we don't accept that. And that is the problem. People came even to the dawah with that same extreme Sufi Hizbi mentality and mindset that, hey, we need to blind follow this sheikh or this person. We need these individuals so that way we can understand our deen, or we can be on the haqq. So you have to get rid of that mentality. Go ahead.
Khalid, jazakallah khair. Before we draw to a conclusion, a beautiful exhortation what you've given there. I really, really appreciate that. And I think that what we need to be asking ourselves just on that particular point, after the clarification that Dr. Khalid has given so lucidly, is he's referred to hizbiyah, partisanship, I will say cultism and everything. We have to ask ourselves, what are we on this deen for? Are we in need of do we need validation from others? Do we need to be moving afraid to be ostracized because we've taken a position, or we're not kowtowing, or we're not following blindly personalities, as Dr. Khalid is saying, whether it be an individual purporting to be a person of knowledge or a scholar in themselves? Dr. Khalid has given a clear criteria which was there in the beginning and will be there in the end, so far as it's concerned with regards to this deen. So we've got to stop seeking validation from others. We've got to stop seeking external referencing from others, because when we enter the grave, which we will enter, kullu nafsin dha'iqatul maut, every soul will taste death, you're not going to be asked about these scholars or these personalities or why you are with this Jamaat. We know the questions of the grave, and we know the finality of those who enter the grave having adhered to this deen successfully, dependent on ultimately the rahmah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and on the day that we're going to be standing. And so now ask yourselves this question. I've had people come to me over the years, I'm sure Khalid has, especially the last 20 years. Why do you still call yourself Salafi? It's got such bad press. Let's use another name, discard of the name and everything like that. And I've stuck my mast firmly. My PhD, Dr. Khalid's PhD, the work that we've been doing clearly shows we are Salafi. Now, I say Salafi, capital S, small s, meaning that it is an ascription and an adherence that I am upon and what I try to emulate. It is not a group or an entity with a membership that I belong to, that has particular scholars at the helm or particular members in the group in that instance. It is none of that. And if groups exist within the Salafi mosaic that are doing that, then we don't need to join that.
It's a reflection on them, not the dawah.
Yeah, there's no obligation to join that. And remember this as well as we conclude. Others are afraid of being told or labeled that they're not Salafi. And I know there are communal issues to that. There are societal issues. It can cause problems in the local community that you're in. But hold on a minute. Is it they who decide your Salafiyah? Or is it Allah? Based on what you know and what you practice. Do you see Khalid and I here, and we've been labeled, we've been accused? Oh, they're not Salafi. And we run around like, we have to prove our Salafiyah. We've got to prove our Salafiyah. We've got to prove we're Salafis. I'll say frankly here, excuse my abruptness, I don't give a damn what anyone says concerning my practice and adherence to Salafiyah and what I'm upon. I really don't, because it's not upon them, and it's not them who guided me towards Salafiyah, who gave me scholars gave the understanding of Salafiyah. I accept that, mashallah, tabarakallah, but it's not, they are not the deciding factor upon my Salafiyah. Just like we enter Islam with certainty and one leaves Islam with certainty, we should be certain about what Salafiyah is, what it's not, and adhere to it if we embrace the truthfulness of it. And that's it. And there's no one else who's going to tell you you are or you're not, unless you start espousing creedal positions, methodological positions that are clearly antithetical to this manhaj, this blessed deen, like Abdul al-Faisal did, like Abu Qatada did, like Abu Hamza did, like those who are now professing, Yasir Qadi and others, who he doesn't profess himself. And we mention names when we need to mention names. It's very, very clear. Viewers, listeners, participants, it's very, very clear. So that we get these questions once in a while. The Doctor's Lab is here for that. And you can see that unabashedly, unashamedly, we discuss Salafiyah, not with this partisan excessiveness, but from a semi-academic perspective, based on knowledge. Khalid and I don't always agree concerning particular approaches, but you've never seen a difference upon the fundamentals, the Aqidah, the Tawheed. That is Salafiyah. Because on there and in that, it is immutable. And I think, Khalid, unless you want to add to that, we can conclude. We've gone over. I know it's a long time back, but I hope we haven't gone too long and burdened our viewers too much. But I'll pass the last words over to you, inshallah.
There was a question someone asked about being a hypocrite, and I can't recall if, Hassan, if you could pull that up. Someone said something about, am I a hypocrite if something, and I can't remember exactly what the question is. So I think that's important to address, and then we can conclude.
Hassan, if you can find that point that was there, do let us know. There was our sister Aisha, something Islam. She was giving some very nice comments about remembering when she used to go into London and was learning about Salafiyah and everything like that. And alhamdulillah, many who were learning. Has it come up yet?
No, I can see that we can look in the chat as well, but someone said something about hypocrisy, and if not, we can end if we can't find it really quickly.
Okay.
Yeah, I did you find it? No, I haven't seen anything. Okay, so yeah, I don't see it. It's quite a few comments there. So anyhow, inshallah ta'ala, hopefully this has been something that has highlighted some important topics and been beneficial. I know I benefited from from what my brother Dr. Abdul Haqq has presented, and hopefully you found benefit in what I said as well.
Yes,
and
absolutely.
we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to protect us and preserve us and bless us all with ikhlas, with ثبات على سنة النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم. Somebody said something about new comments. Learning from the Salafis, but not calling yourself Salafi. Yeah, it was something about that. Someone asked. Again, yeah, it actually, the question was, I don't know if it's the same person, but they actually did say, so learning from the Salafis, but not calling yourself Salafi. Again, it's not necessary that you necessarily give yourself a label. Some of the scholars have mentioned about that, and it seemed that that was kind of the position of Imam al-Albani, and I think Sheikh Ubaida Jabri and others. But really, as far as the evidence, the stronger evidence that you have to call, no, because if you say you have to, then it becomes, this is a hukm shar'i, that it's either something that's wajib, you're saying it's wajib, or you're saying it's mamduh, it's recommended, or you're saying it's mubah, it's permissible, or you're saying it's disliked. So you have to be careful about those things. And there's and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best, but as far as the main thing is, you need to adhere to the madhab of the Salaf. That's your approach to Islam. How did they see the divine names and attributes? What did they think about the issue of rebelling against the Muslim ruler? What does the Quran say? What does the Sunnah say? What did the early generations say? Okay, and it's also not like some of those individuals who take cut and paste and look at issues and say, well, some of the Salaf did this, and some of this did this in order to stir controversy, but rather it's what's been codified as a minhaj or a methodology.
No, Jazakallah khair, Khalid. And I think that's a good note to end on that. And thank you for getting that up. And Jonah, really, really good point that's been raised there. We don't need to place this label upon ourselves. We don't need to place any label upon ourselves. As Khalid has said, and I think this is where we will conclude, it's what you are adhering to, what you are ascribing to. That is the important thing, not the label, not the name. And yes, you're hearing us as Salafis who are not worried about calling ourselves as such, saying this. So I think let's end on that. And the shows are usually an hour, but we've been away for a long time and we've been effusing and looking forward to engaging with you all. And I hope we haven't overburdened you. And we look forward to seeing you in a fortnight, where we're going to up the ante a bit, when we're going to be speaking about 9/11 and post 9/11. Wayak, and thank you, 𝘾𝙗𝙦, for your comments. We look forward to seeing you in a fortnight. Jazakumullah khair, Khalid. Thank you, everyone, for engaging with us, and take care until then. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.